Now, I
Okay.
think we're live now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome to our Wednesday web jam. We have some very exciting things happening today. So get ready. Just to start off, we will, it's already streaming on YouTube. Hi, YouTube. And we would be, so if you'd like to join us with your smile, that would be the best. But if you're busy or if you wouldn't, that's also fine. And you're here with us. We would be taking some screenshots to just share and tell people what a great time we had. So just to let you know. And Mimp, next slide, please. And yes, this is who we are. We are learners, innovators, facilitators, design thinkers, change makers. So you will spot yourself somewhere or the other here. And this is the space that we are. Our motto is failing forward, which we practice very proudly and successfully. So yeah, just be kind, be nice, be empathetic in the space that we are, because this is what community is about, like bringing it together. And now I can definitely start and introduce our today's speaker. Our today's speaker is someone who is going to tell us about what community is. And I think it's very important for us to kind of look at this topic, because we, the Web Jam community, is who we are for us and for you. And how do we create a community that is effective, happy, trustworthy? What are the key points? So Todd is our person to inform us. So over to you, Todd. Todd, I think you're on mute.
Am I on? Hello?
Yes.
Hey, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anupa. I so deeply appreciate the invitation to be on the Wednesday web jams. I had only recently learned about these, but looking back through the back catalog of design thinkers and all the great ideas, I'm really honored to be a guest and excited to be here today to join you to talk a little bit about building online communities. And so what you're going to get out of today's conversation is my orientation and background to online community spaces, whether they happen to be a Facebook group or a discussion forum or a Slack channel or a social intranet for your organization. There are a lot of different flavors. In fact, there's just hundreds of different tools that could be construed as an online community, including, in some cases, a Google Doc that has a chat area on it, or where students can exchange information about things that they're doing. Communities pop up in a lot of different places, and it's totally based upon people sharing a sense of trust in the platform where they are, and having a sense of trust in one another to share ideas and interact and do great things with each other online. So I got into this space a pretty good amount of time ago as a consultant back around 2013. But I've been involved with online communities since going back to arguably the 80s and AOL chat rooms, but certainly the 90s and early 2000s. With online discussions and online discussion forums and wikis in multiplayer game spaces. So having lived in these places for a long time and having seen sort of the rise of social media platforms, I got very excited about the business applications and social change implications for building these kinds of spaces. Like what makes them good? What's a community versus not a community in an online space? How do we figure out if we want to build something like this for our organization? How do we make it a trustworthy and useful and thriving space over a long period of time? And as it turns out, there's a pretty good amount of social science and psychology that's involved with thinking about building, workable online community spaces. So I spent, this is maybe career number 4 or 5 for me. I've been a journalist. I was on the path to becoming an English professor, and got wise because I wanted to be employed. I spent some time, working as a recruiter. Actually, I spent about 14 years working as a tech recruiter, a headhunter, if you will, as a third-party guy. And so, I think all of those things contributed to my journey here into the community building space, which as a career didn't exist when I was first going to school. And I think, like so many of our careers that we have now and that we can look at going into the future, new categories are going to keep emerging around this. And so I expect community management as a space is going to become maybe even more specialized over time. I think we're starting to see some of that right now with the Web3 space and all of the communities that have popped up around NFT trading and that world. Whether you love that or not, it's actually something that's brought communities to the fore and have popularized them in new ways. And the people that run online communities for Web3 kinds of spaces maybe have a slightly different set of concerns or things that they're learning about. And so it may be in the future that you'll have sort of your Web2 community managers and your Web3 community managers, and never the two do meet. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, obviously. So it's really great to see people from all around the world here. I'm very excited about this. I will keep an eye on the chat, and I'm sure Anupa and Mimp and Webke will also be calling out things if there's a question that comes up that's here. I'm very happy for this to be a collaborative session, and I'll just preface any of the materials that I share with you here today, and there's a Miro board I'm gonna share that we'll be able to take a look at here in just a minute. There's nothing here that I'm not willing to discuss. I mean, I think part of the excitement of meeting a new group of people is you all have your own experiences and knowledge bases that you're looking at things from. You may look at some of my materials and quite legitimately question what's there. And so I'm looking forward to any kind of discussion or questions that come up as a result of today's co-collaboration. I really like the orientation and approach of the Wednesday Web Jams for that reason. Anupa, should I go ahead and do the share screen and just get started here?
Yeah, sure. Why don't you go ahead?
Terrific. So I am based in Wisconsin in the United States here. I'm directly across the street from Lake Michigan, in fact. And my wife and I take walks on the beach every morning, even, yes, in the dead of winter, because we are diehards of being outside. And I really love my local community as well. I'm very involved with entrepreneurship and starting new businesses. And so I tend to think of marrying these interests together, quite a lot as I work through my day-to-day professional life. So I've titled this "Why the Woolly Mammoth Matters to Your Online Community." It was a bit of a shameless hook to try to get some interest from you guys about what we're building. But there is a serious side to this that if you think about the early formation of communities, we as humans came together in many cases because we were being hunted by something that was likely to kill us, or we needed food. And the woolly mammoth is kind of a good symbol of that, where we need something, some irritant or opportunity that is going to help us form a space together. And it may not be an existential threat, but it may be something in terms of a profession that needs to be improved. It may just be fellowship, for people that have similar circumstances or similar interests and really want to come together and talk about that. So one of the things I'll be getting into today is talking about definitions of communities. What are some of the hallmarks of healthy communities, and really how to get started if you've got a community space that you're working on or thinking of working on. I want to give you a bit of a toolbox or some frameworks to maybe look at and be able to operate with going forward. So with that said, I am gonna go ahead and launch in here. If you are interested in more about this, I understand there's going to be an unplugged session right after this hour. I will stick around for about a half an hour, slightly less than that. I've got to jump to another meeting, but happy to stick around to discuss your one-on-one, kinds of interests about community. But if you want to see more, if you're interested in more, you are welcome to visit my website, which is clocktoweradvisors.com. Or you are absolutely welcome to follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Actually, when I open up the Miro board in a little bit for some of the interactive exercises, I welcome you to even paste in your LinkedIn connection if you want to connect up with me there. I'll be sure to follow all of those links after the meeting as well, and we can go from there. So why don't we go ahead and get started here? Hey, I see John Summers. Hey, hello, John. Some familiar faces. So as I start thinking about online communities, one of the things that has come up for me a lot with organizations, particularly large enterprises, but as people start thinking about making their online spaces more interactive as opposed to sort of one-way communication mechanisms, I spend a lot of time contextualizing where online communities fall in terms of some big other kinds of technologies that are out there. In particular, social media is often mistaken for community. And while there can certainly be communities that form on the big social media platforms, and while you could easily argue that online communities are a form of social media platform, I make the distinction between these in terms of how static or dynamic these platforms are and how much control, whether high or low, exists. And I really feel that online communities fall in this middle ground between social media, which is very dynamic and low control, and online communities, which are also very dynamic, but they've got sort of a moderate level of control because they're a little more private. There's a little more protection around these kinds of spaces. And if you've belonged to a discussion forum or something on WhatsApp, a group on WhatsApp or a Facebook or LinkedIn group, then you've probably been in an online community. If you've been in Microsoft Teams or a Slack, those are also arguably online community spaces. I wouldn't call them social media spaces necessarily, though in the broadest sense of the term, you can maybe think of them in that sort of way. So the reason I end up using this kind of graphic a lot is I sit down and talk to executive leaders and start working with them through what their plans are for an online community. One of the first things that's usually out of their mouth, they'll say, "Oh, it's like Facebook, right?" Or "I want a Facebook for my organization." And so part of this is sort of level setting expectations and understanding what that means. And one way that I usually kind of get this across to them is to say, you know what, social media is the party that's open to anyone that never ends. And so that's kind of a way to start thinking about the distinction, because with online communities, there are usually some criteria for entry. It could be a community for women firefighters living in Nebraska. That would be a legitimate community. There's some boundaries around who belongs in that group and who probably doesn't belong into that group. And they'll probably self-select themselves, into that group. WebJam Wednesday is for innovators and entrepreneurs and design thinkers, people that want to think a little bit differently or want to bring something else to the table. Those are valid criteria for building an online community. You may have those people gathering on a TikTok account and coming back to somebody who's an influencer, but it's a little harder to create that sense of community in an open social platform where there are tons of distractions that are always coming in and interrupting you all of the time. So again, thinking about that, very different. And obviously, online communities are very different than a straight website, which tends to be a lot more static, more curated, and there's a high control around that. So it's definitely not social. But it is definitely less controlled than something like email or live meetings or straight up Zoom meetings. Those kinds of things are not great at being communities because the persistence and availability of information is not quite as free in those kinds of spaces. So again, online communities occupying kind of that middle space. So another good place to start is with what is a definition of online communities? A lot of different versions that are out there that I've seen over the years, but in general, this one has all the elements that I usually look for. It's a group of people who regularly meet online and develop trusting relationships to discuss shared interests or to achieve desired goals. It's broad enough, but it has the elements that make it work. You know, the key things that I would highlight out of this definition: group of people, again, there's criteria for entry, regularly meet online. I would emphasize regularly, means we come back again and again because there is value there. A lot of communities get launched and they're not really clear about the value that's being offered. And so therefore, people don't come back. They sign up once and they just never return again. And so this is a very common problem with community strategies where the value proposition has not been really clearly communicated upfront, and it's not regularly communicated to the members so that they understand what value is being offered. Develop trusting relationships. Obviously, trust is super important in online spaces. It is easier to trust when you've met somebody face to face. But more often than not, we know people online better than we do our next door neighbors. And so developing those trusting relationships involves, in a lot of communities, getting to know people via the technology platform as an intermediating kind of source. And how you create trust in those spaces where people are introducing themselves by and large by text. Increasingly, we have wonderful things like video-based conferencing and ways to meet each other sort of face-to-face and to pick up all the wonderful visual and body cues of these kinds of interactions. But really, that trust needs to develop over time. It needs to be earned, and it needs to be done through careful communication and curation of space. And so community management is something that as a profession needs to be carefully attended to. Otherwise, it doesn't really engender that feeling of a safe space where people can interact and offer each other help. And then finally, that idea of shared goals or achieving desired goals or shared interests, that's something we're going to talk a little bit more about as we go forward. So I've given you a bit of a context for the ecosystem and for a working definition of what's here. I'm kind of curious, and I want to open this up. I think Anupa will put a link to the mural board in here to this view of cards. And what I basically like you to do is think about the communities that you've belonged to, particularly online community spaces, and list what it is here briefly on one of these Post-it notes. If you've belonged to a couple, please add them in here. These could be communities that you've belonged to personally or professionally, that are places that you've maybe found some value in. And we'll just kind of take a little couple of minutes and start adding to this board if that is okay. I don't know, how long do you guys normally run these exercises for? Just a couple of minutes. Does that work? Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Anupa.
Yeah, we can share a minute or two where people can start populating.
Perfect.
We already see some.
Yeah, Wednesday Web Jam, absolutely. That works. So I'm seeing LinkedIn showing up here a little bit. Rather than thinking about LinkedIn as because LinkedIn is a big social media platform, but is there a particular group that you belong to on LinkedIn? NFT clubs, DAO, that's cool. FS, I don't know what that is, but that sounds interesting. Legend of Phoenix gaming community in Discord. That sounds awesome. Fun. Yeah, there may be there are many categories of online communities. They can be things like communities of practice. They could be hobby communities. They could be, fans of the latest television show that you're a fan of. Any fans of Star Trek Strange New Worlds out there? I know that's been a fun new series. Design community, that's great. Bosch, NBC. Future Spaces. So many neat community examples here. These are great. Yeah, and if there's a LinkedIn or a Facebook group that you belong to, if you're comfortable sharing what that is. Some design thinking networks, that's great. You guys are giving me ideas about places where I need to be. Susan Corsand raised the hand. Susan, what's on your mind?
Susan, you're on mute. Maybe you'd like to put in your question or insight on chat, and I can read it out.
That'd be perfect. All right. So this looks great. And I think I asked to do this because you need to think about the communities that you belong to and what is it about them. And we'll do an exercise on that separately in a moment. But what is it about them that's made them sticky, that's brought you back? Maybe you haven't come back to them in a while. Maybe this, me asking you this question, has been the first time in a while where you've realized, oh, I don't know how to populate this folder. I'm so sorry, Susan. Yeah, so these are set up like little note cards. And if you double click on one of the green cards, you can get in and type in it. Hopefully that helps. So it's just a little double click and you can add
or
to it.
You can just put it into the chat and I can like populate it on your behalf.
Yeah. So lots of great communities that are out there. And so communities can be about professional practice. They can be based on belief. They can be based on a social cause. They can be based on a hobby or a special interest. And so it ranges incredibly. And if you think about the history of online communities, they go back to the very beginnings of the internet, when you had listservs for email lists where people would go back and forth there with discussions, or the early discussion forums, the BBS boards, things like that. But these platforms have now developed in a lot of different interesting ways, where we have things that are now chat-based, that grew out of IRC and are now things like Slack and Teams. We still have forums with us very much, and there's some great modern implementations of forums like Vanilla Software or Discourse, or even Chorus and Higher Logic. And then we've got, I think a new generation of some platforms that are going to be coming online as well, that are, virtual world kinds of spaces where, I don't know that we're necessarily going to be strapping on some goggles on our face to do it, because that's still very unwieldy. But thinking about, virtual spaces that are almost like 3D game environments, but they're spaces for professional interaction and networking, ways to maybe simulate a conference in an online space. They're more architectural than they are textual. And so there's so many possibilities about the ways that these things are developing. Yeah, MIRC, right? So I played in IRC land for a while, some years ago. Yeah, neuroscience DBS. That's a great one. I don't know, Anupa, if you added that one in. But these are terrific. So we're gonna come back to these, but kind of keep those communities in the back of your mind for the moment. And what I want you to start thinking about, I'm going to come back to that woolly mammoth theme. This is something else that I put in front of executives and leaders within organizations when they tell me they want to build an online community for their organization. Because I'll say, well, we need to think about whether the idea for your community is something that is prone to becoming a swift community. In other words, is it going to start up relatively quickly, get a lot of growth, and get a lot of interaction, from others very quickly? Or is it going to be something that is going to be a slow burn kind of community? And it's totally okay if your community I'm going to do it. My apologies in advance to anybody that lives in the accounting world, but your accounting software community of practice, if it's a slow burn and you're okay with that's fine. But you need to have that to sort of set and gauge your expectations. Swift communities can start up and get to viability and what I would call maybe a mature stage within a matter of months. Slow burn communities could take years. And some communities of practice, depending on how busy people are or how much sense of a safety they have with each other or how directly it's attached, like they're attached to that profession, they maybe come back once a week to look at discussions and do things. And that's okay, as long as that expectation is set. And so I think that idea of the woolly mammoth, it kind of helps people wrap their brain around that. The idea that the woolly mammoth in the earliest days in the Stone Age was either a source of food or something terrifying that you had to deal with in your immediate vicinity. These are survival threats. They're existential threats. Those kinds of online community examples today would be things like a support community for cancer, or a Black Lives Matter community, or something that is a direct threat to your immediate population, your immediate group. As things sort of move down the line or kind of move out in these concentric circles a little bit further, they may just be things that are interesting or distracting or kind of fun. A Star Trek community, depending on how core it is to your life and to your beliefs, you may be more or less passionate about it. But these less arresting kinds of community ideas, they may be interesting, they may offer distraction, they might be fun, but they're not necessarily something that you're going to want to come back to every day, unless you're just a real diehard, fan around those kinds of things. And there are also considerations around something called the 99-1 rule, which is that anytime you build a community like this, that as many as 90% of the people that join that community are probably never going to be direct contributors to that community space. 9% of them might be occasional contributors. Every so often they'll put in something. And 1% of them might be your super fans who come in and post something every day. I think the actual research around this is a little bit more generous than that. I've seen community participation rates as much as maybe 20, 25% in some communities, which is great. I would look at that as a very healthy number. But something around 9 or 10%, I wouldn't necessarily be alarmed about, especially if the community is a little bit earlier in its inception phase and kind of what's going on. So now I'll ask you to think about your online communities that you mentioned a little bit earlier. And I've kind of given two sides here, sort of the red and the blue. And for your community, either choose a red or a blue post-it to indicate that it's a hot idea, red, that this was something that they've got a really good arresting concept, that it's a very active community people come back to again and again. Or if it's a cold community, has it fizzled out, or is just not very active, or it's even kind of, died off over time. Take a minute or two and now specify which one of these, the community that you've mentioned earlier, or maybe a different one, belongs to for you. Susan has raised her hand again. We got some cold communities. We got some hot communities coming up here. Maker movement. Okay. DEI practitioners on LI. Yep.
Yeah. If anybody also wants to talk while they type,
Yeah.
we'd be happy to hear some comments and some insights.
I would love to hear anybody that wants to talk about why their community is working or why it's not. That I think that would be a great conversation. Reddit keto. So how about this? I know we're running a little bit behind here. As you've filled these in, if you want to add in the chat why they haven't been really great communities, it'd be good to get some of those, and we'll come back to those in the comments as we go on. Does that sound good, Anupa?
Yeah, I think that'll be great.
Okay.
Or maybe people can keep populating it, and
Yeah.
right at the end, if anybody wants to talk about what they felt in reference to what you've been saying, I think that'll be nice to kind of sum up the session.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
So Howard asks, why do communities need to run on collective effort? I feel like you've got something in mind around that, Howard. I'd like to hear more about. Communities are built on groups to begin with, and those groups require some facilitation or encouragement and some safety conditions. If it's not built on collective effort, you're dealing with maybe a project team or something less in size than what I'd think about as a community. We could argue the semantics of that. That's a really interesting question. So I'm going to move on here and talk a little bit about the life cycle of communities. And so this is something based on some research. Oh, happy to help, Howard. This is some research. This is actually based on some research going back to 2009 by a scholar by the name of Iriberry, who proposed a online community life cycle built on the software life cycle, which is arguable whether it's the right model to look at. But I think it's something that's been borne out over time and an experience with, I know certainly with the dozens of community implementations that I've looked at, as well as I think others as well. Richard Millington, the author of Buzzing Communities and who runs feverbee.com, who I used to work with and is still a brilliant guy in the space. He has a version of this as well. This is my take on it. Richard has a version where it goes from launch to growth to maturity to the final side of it he calls mitosis, where communities become a bunch of other little communities, which I don't agree with, and I don't think the research necessarily bears that out. I'm sure he and I could argue about it sometime. But looking at sort of the process of getting a community to launch into a growth mode, when what is the stage at which that it's mature, and then really that red dot point there, where the community is either going to be at a point where it's sustaining its size and engagement and activity and things that are happening in it, or it is evolving or declining. So if the community as a concept no longer works, in other words, we've hunted and killed the woolly mammoth, that purpose is no longer the reason why we are a community. Do we have a new purpose? And if the answer to that is no, then that community is going to decline and go away, and it's okay if it goes away. If, however, the answer to that question is yes, there's still a problem with saber-toothed tigers in our area, then that may become the new reason or the evolution for that community concept over time. So in thinking about the communities that you're in or that you're running, even the most mature active communities can run out of gas over time, or they may reinvent themselves as something new. Many of the communities that I know of today tend to be in that sustaining mode. They figured out a way to kind of keep going where they are. There are always opportunities for more engagement or to do more, but that's kind of a way to think of it. And the reason that these things are important, that these steps are important, is that there are some metrics that you can attach to these kinds of ideas based on organic growth, based on the timeline. So this is kind of a typical timeline, based on something called the sense of community. This is actually a validated mechanism called the Sense of Community Index 2. You can find the website link to it right here in the Miro board. And it's actually like a 28 question survey that you can send out to your community that helps to determine what is that level or sense of belonging that exists in that space. And then thinking about member motivations as well, ranging from unmotivated to external to intrinsically motivated. How do we move them? How do we move the needle? What kinds of things do people want to do when they first join a community that's just in launch mode versus a maturity space? And then how you engage newcomers in each of these spaces. If you're the manager of a given community or the facilitator for that space, the things you do or the emphasis of your activities will change based from stage to stage in this process over time. So I don't know if any of you are planning to start a community or if you're in that process. I'd love to hear from you in the chat if there's something that's there. And I don't know, Anupa, if you want to just kind of add that as a question in, that would be great. And if you're not thinking about a community, you may want to think about taking the plunge and doing this, because I think what I've been finding, certainly since the pandemic, there's been a renewed interest in online engagement because so many people working for organizations are now working remotely, or they've got a hybrid work kind of situation. Organizations have put new money and time and investment and thought into building cool, workable, safe spaces for people to interact. I think, at the same time, a reaction to that has been the Great Resignation, and thinking about people who have left their roles because they haven't had the opportunity to work remotely or to stay remote when organizations were asking them to come back. So that's led to a lot of interest. And I think the shift to online purchasing that happened during the pandemic as well, more people didn't want to go in stores. Even though I think a lot of B2C kinds of organizations had already been thinking about things like the omni-channel experience and sort of what happens online versus offline purchasing decisions, they've put a lot more energy into the online customer relationship and building customer loyalty. And online communities, frankly, work better than open social media experiences for enabling superfans and customers to get together. So we see a question here from Fabricio. The collective effort will present the pains that you have or will face and show you solutions that you need and didn't know about the subject. Absolutely. Uncovering hidden knowledge or tribal knowledge is a key use of online communities. The fast pace of the environment is the fuel to increase fast. Yeah. I think, kind of putting people together with like interests, certainly helps accelerate activities. And like some of the social cause organizations I've worked with, for instance, Greenpeace or some others that I've worked with that were working to save the Amazon and preserve indigenous peoples. Some of that work with volunteers, they wanted to create online communities so that they didn't have to re-recruit volunteers. Every time they had an event, they'd have to go back out, find volunteers for a project. And then when the project was done, those guys would all go away. With an online community, you can keep that group of volunteers engaged continuously, and it's much easier to ramp up for individual kinds of efforts like that. Ayana says, thinking about creating a community on Discord for student engagement issue. Will this create just another block to students who are already inundated with too many points of connection engagement? Maybe. So I would say a key thing to think about, Ayana, is to have, 10 or 15 conversations with some of those students, how they're engaging, what they would find useful. What are they going to do in that space? Let me introduce you to a couple of ideas, and this may help you going forward. So first of all, there are three reasons that online communities fail. The first of which is a lack of a shared definition. I have now given you one that's at least a working space for you to start from. The second one is that the team misunderstands the role of online communities in the digital ecosystem. They think about it in terms of social media, as opposed to being something that's a little more private, a little more walled off to create safety for deeper conversations and deeper interest in things. And then third, the team has either skipped or ignored the success factors for establishing an online community. I'm going to share those with you right now. So there are 8. They come back again and again and again in my experience. And of these, the success factor is the community concept unique? And does it promise high value for members? Again, as you just said, the students already have too many channels. Well, that becomes a question of, is your message of what you're going to offer in this community unique enough that it gets their attention, that they want to do it? Part of my regular engagement as a consultant, helping organizations is, I'll sit down and I'll work with a leadership team to figure out what the community they think they want looks like. But then the next phase of work is me doing one-on-one interviews and surveys and focus groups to hear directly from those individuals about what they might be interested in, what they might like, kind of running the idea past them to see what are some of the key concerns for them. So that's definitely important. The community goals should relate to your business objectives. An organization, if you're going to start up and run an online community, it should probably align with some of the key business objectives of your organization. Launch small. This one is important because I think particularly a lot of enterprise organizations want to do a big splashy PR, type launch, big social media push, about their launch. But they're doing it before they've necessarily even vetted out what's working and what's not. It's better to offer some backstage passes to a group of people that are going to be, super users or influentials. Give them that VIP treatment, get them in, get them working in the platform, and most importantly, get them talking to each other so that they're able to start exchanging ideas. And as you open it up to progressively larger groups of people, they can get a little bit more involved and move. So again, I'm going to move through the rest of these kind of quickly because we're running a little short on time, but valuing community management over community technology platforms. I will take a good community manager over a beautiful online platform experience any day. You can give me a primitive online community technology and a really great community manager, and they're going to still manage to build a good community. Planning for both growth and engagement. You can't just do a big membership push up front and then stop worrying about it. You need to continue to have external marketing to get people to come into the community. And you also need to be planning for how you're going to keep them engaged once they come into the space. Knowing how you're going to engage members over their full journey. A member who joins the community very early on has very different needs than somebody who's been with the community for a couple of years. And thinking about that journey map and what they're going to need over time is something that should be part of your regular exercise and thinking about that community. Success should be quantified and regularly measured. So again, I would build those quantifications around things like growth, people who are joining the platform, and then engagement. How are you retaining those individuals over time? How many posts in a month are being put out there by your members? How many replies are appearing? How many resources were shared in the space? Those are things that are indicative of the health of your community. And then how many of those things resulted in a sale of the widget that you're selling, or cross-pollinated kinds of sales, like cross-selling or upselling, or how many of those things are resulting in somebody purchasing your services? Thinking about the business objectives as well as the community health objectives together. And then finally, setting expectations about time to success. Again, it's one of the reasons I show that woolly mammoth diagram to executives in the beginning to make sure that they have an understanding of about how long it's going to take to start seeing results. If they think you're going to get 100,000 people in a platform within the first month of launch, they're probably smoking something. You need to get them into a place where they are a little more realistic about when and how things are going to grow to where you need them to be. And I'm not going to say much about this, but this is built on self-determination theory. And this is a bit of that mental journey that a new member goes through from being not motivated at all to be a part of the platform, totally extrinsically motivated, to moving up the scale to the right here to being a little bit more intrinsically motivated. It's rare that anybody is fully intrinsically motivated to participate in a community. There's usually some extrinsic kind of reward system as well, even if it's just like gamification badges or points or just the status of being a top influencer, within a given space. Thank you so much, Michaela. I appreciate it. Yeah, so Fabrizio, the use of rewards and badges in communities is that a key part of success. Yeah, I want to come back to that. I think that's a really good one. Gamification is an interesting animal in and of itself. I could do a whole session about that, but I just want to hold that one for a second because I'm almost to a pause point. I do want to introduce to you one really nice resource that obviously I can't cover everything in this short session that we have here, but this is called the Community Canvas, and it was put together by several designers who had built both live and online communities over time. And I've probably done versions of this over a period of years, but the Community Canvas, when it came out in 2017, got my attention pretty immediately because it's a very nice way to encapsulate and answer the basic questions that you need for your community build. And oh yeah, we know about this too. It's really helpful. They've got workbooks on the site where you can go through very in-depth questions. I'm personally a fan of the minimally viable community framework, especially if you're working with a group of leadership executives. It's a great way to get them in a room and to get them answering some of these key questions. And I like the visual design of what they've created in this graphic, where what's in blue is really around purpose and identity. What's in green is sort of the underlying support mechanisms and communications plans for the platform. And what's in red are the elements of the community that are really the experience of people coming in from their onboarding to their offboarding and transition out of the community, if it is appropriate for them to ever leave. I think a lot of communities are built with the sense that they're the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. But people do leave communities over time if they're no longer relevant to them or what their needs happen to be. So this is an example of the minimally viable community canvas. This is my version of it, where I've added some questions that I think are a little more pointed than what those guys have used in there. So if you have used the community canvas before, you may want to look at the questions. Some of these questions are a little different than what you're going to find in the one that's available up on the website. And you are welcome to crib and use this. I don't need credit for it necessarily. It's just minor contribution. So again, these are some of the pieces to think about with community build. I think we got about 10 minutes left for some questions. And I'm happy to have people come up on stage or kind of talk about things directly with me, or if you want to drop things in the chat as well, we can definitely take a look at that. Anupa, how do you want to handle that?
Sure. I think we have about 5 minutes because then we introduce next week's session. So yeah, and then again, we have the backstage for undivided attention and conversation. But I think you posed a lot of important questions about just the cycle, the community cycle, and from the launch to the delivery to the scale, and then the leaving, of the whole experience and engagement. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions in my head, but I'm sure our community here also would want to pose anything. So anybody, we would love to hear about you. Michaela, would you like to talk about ideal roles needed to support online community? Anything that's popped up, and then Todd can add to that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Todd. This has been so incredibly helpful. So my question is related to roles, because I understand kind of looking at the arc of a community development. I'm curious what you notice in terms of what kind of roles are needed to support a community as it moves from that kind of ideation to launch phase.
I love that question. So certainly a community manager. And depending on the size of that team, that the number of community managers may scale over time. And so picking the right kind of community manager, maybe somebody from maybe somebody from the community who's had some experience with facilitation or customer service might make a good choice for something like that, especially if you're in sort of a lean startup mode. That might be of interest. If you're in an enterprise and it's maybe, a developer relations community, if you can find a outgoing developer who has sort of that orientation to facilitating conversations, is a really important person to find. I often find the community managers work best who have maybe worked in an adjacent industry or something similar. They can tend to fit in better. And also community managers who have had experience at the stage of your community. So if you could have a really experienced community manager who's always come into existing and mature communities, and you ask them to start up in a community from scratch, they might really struggle if it's very early in their stage. Some of the other roles that you would probably want to have involved would be things like maybe having a good data scientist, somebody to help with the metrics and dashboarding side of things. Maybe having a good visual designer to help with the look and feel of the platform. Depending on what platform you pick, you may not have a lot of options there. It may just let you pick a logo and some colors, depending, like if you pick one of the turnkey platforms like Disciple or Mighty Networks or Circle or something like that, it's going to limit you. So you may not need that person, for it. If you have a community that needs to have a lot of integrations to other things, you may need somebody with some development chops to do that, database integration or API, kinds of calls. If you wanted to connect your community with your CRM system, for example, you probably need somebody that knows what they're doing to help with that process. And then I think at another level to think about, you probably also need some kind of governance team, especially if it's a larger organization. You need some people, probably a cross-functional team of people who maybe have a stake in what that community does. Maybe it's somebody from your product management team. It might be somebody from marketing and communications, might be somebody from human resources. Having a steering committee that can help that community manager be accountable and to help them think about any and make decisions about any kinds of edge cases or crisis within the community. It's good to have that support network within the organization as well.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for one more question by Pike, if I'm not mistaken. Todd, do you want to respond to that?
Sorry, which question?
What do you suggest to create a support community in addition to a support page which is full of guides and troubleshooting articles?
Yeah, I think a key reason that so many organizations have set up support communities, in addition to FAQs or troubleshooting articles or any of those kinds of great resources, is to deflect trouble tickets from their organization. And so they may have a customer service team that vets help desk tickets that come in or phone calls that come in, and the community, by having those kinds of resources, within the community, having the FAQs, having the guides, but also having peers or other kinds of support moderators in place who can answer those questions, can maybe deflect, some of those kinds of day-to-day questions that are hitting a help desk, and so that can be a big help.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Todd. This has been a superbly insightful session, not only for us as the WebJam crew, Mimp and Hipk and I were internally saying, oh, this is awesome, this is going to help us so much, but also I think for people who want to start up and also our audio participants here today, I think this is definitely a key construct and a foundation for people to build their own community or who are managing the communities to further it. So thank you so much. What I'll do is, Mimp, can you share the screen so I can introduce our next week's speakers, sorry. So yes, we will be talking about the very well-known Theory U, and about awareness based on the change with Theory U and with Maria and Rafaela. So please stay tuned and catch our posts and registration links in all over our social media. That's one. We have another session which is happening in 2 weeks. So this is basically called Pecha Kucha. It's a pot of ideas. So Pecha Kucha is 20 minutes, 20 seconds for 20 slides, where you can present any idea that revolves around design thinking, service design, innovation. So we just want it's a very light-hearted session. We just want to see what is happening in the community, who's doing what, who's thinking about what, it's just so we can share and create. I know it's right after the 4th of July, but I hope we still have people dropping in and sharing. We will be putting this post also along with our next week's post. So just put your name into the chat or reach out to any one of us on the WebJam crew, and we'll get back to you and we can slot it in. We wanted to start this a bit earlier because so just for people to think what they'd like to share. It's just a brainstorming of how we can collaborate, and you might spot a session that you would like to, like a project that you'd like to join. So Suzanne, it's Pecha Kucha, so which is 20 seconds, not minutes, 20 seconds for 20 slides. So each second is one slide. So it's a very fast-paced and innovative slide of way of presentation. And we just wanted to pack in as many ideas as possible. And then after that, maybe there'll be like a 5 or 10 minute area where, you as a presenter can talk about your, idea. So that's what it is. We'll be talking about it more on our social media posts. So thank you so much. And also, if you'd like to host your own jam, please send in your ideas of what do you think, how you can collaborate with the ethos of the web jam, because that's also equally important that your idea matches us. And we can take it forward. I think that's enough from me, and we will I'll give it over to Todd, who, we also have our, maybe can you just go back? That's our lovely crew, who we are. Just go one slide back. Yeah, this is who we are. So if you've spotted anybody, you can drop in and say hi. And if you're not, just connect with us. That'll be great. And for our lovely web jam that happens, we're a voluntary group. So just for our operational and some managerial costs, if you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee, that would be help. So we can just, help us out with MailChimp, Zoom, website, all the operational stuff that we need. So that's all from me, and over to Todd and and we go into the backstage and we say bye to YouTube.
Goodbye, YouTube. Everybody wave. Goodbye. Goodbye.